Hi, everybody. Welcome to the New Jersey Globe post-election live stream, which I think we all like a little better than the pre-election live stream because now we don't get it wrong. But I'm joined tonight by Micah Rasmussen, director of the Rebovich Institute of New Jersey Politics at Rider University, and by New Jersey Globe reporters Joey Fox and Zach Blackburn. And so here we are after a incredibly for us a really long week. But a lot happened, and I think what we'll do is first of all, I say that with first of all, I don't have to clean up a lot from what I said last week. I think we got things mostly on the money in the sense of there weren't a whole lot of surprises, but and when there were, I guess we didn't. These were the races that we said we just didn't know how they were doing. So there, I've now covered myself, and so I thank all of you, for a really good week. We're having a better week than the dumbass sergeant from the Essex County Prosecutor's Office who steals a journalist's camera and brings it home, not knowing there's an Apple AirTag, and he's having a worse week than Bailey Winder. So it's all going, I'm already off the rails. Why don't we start with the 7th district? This is what happens, everybody, when I'm on like no sleep at all for a week. I get a little punchy, and Piscopo likes it when I'm like this, but most people don't. Let's start with the 7th district, where Rebecca Bennett won, I think, a bigger margin than people thought she would. Now she's up against Tom Kean in what is one of the most interesting House races in the country. So, Joey, let me start with you on this.
Yeah, I mean, so what you said about how that there wasn't a lot we got wrong, I think that people went into Election Day having a pretty clear sense of most of the races, and their senses were vindicated in all of those. And then there were a couple of races where people went into Election Day being like, I don't know who's going to be the GOP U.S. Senate nominee. I don't know who's going to take on Van Drew. And what we got were sort of contested, competitive, interesting races in those. So we called them correctly, and that we didn't know how to call them. But the 7th district was definitely one where we felt like we went into Election Day with a pretty clear sense of where things lay. Rebecca Bennett had just sort of run the table on all of the usual factors that we look for in these races from beginning to end, where she had raised the most money in this district. She had gotten the most party endorsements. She was sort of not so subtly National Democrats' preferred candidate for the district. Everything was kind of coming up her way. The one thing that was putting a crimp in that was the fact that there was a whole bunch of money being spent on ads against her in the last couple of weeks of the campaign. A lot of it from this mysterious super PAC that's probably Republicans, and some of it from Tina Shaw. But we weren't seeing a ton of evidence. First of all, I don't know if I sort of touched on this in the Inside Edge this morning, for those of you who watch that every morning. I don't know how powerful the attacks themselves really were. They weren't really the kinds of things that I think were going to massively upend the state of the race. And, by the time that they came along, Bennett had just built up too much of a lead, and there weren't going to be a huge number of voters who were going to flip from that. And that's exactly what we saw on election night. I mean, I made this map earlier today, and you can tell that there's no weak areas here for Bennett. She just she was the unified choice of nearly a majority of the vote in the district. All three of her opponents did perfectly respectably. But as you can tell, none of them had sort of any particular areas of strength. It really was just sort of Bennett all over. And yeah, now she's going to go up against Tom Kean Jr. This is the matchup that Democrats have sort of been looking towards and looking forward to for a while. The longer that Kean himself is absent from Washington and from the campaign trail, I mean, obviously that sort of makes the narrative that much better for Bennett. She was already going to run against him as, the absent congressman who's not really here for his constituents, and this literalizes that. So yeah, it'll be a good race, but this primary was one that we kind of knew where it was headed, and it headed exactly there.
It looks like, from the map, and I know we don't have Sussex County, but the only places where she didn't finish first are Somerville, Raritan Borough, Lambertville, Phillipsburg, and I should know what's below Manf.
Yeah, the label on that one is really small. It's Washington Borough.
I mean, these are. This is just almost, Micah, jump in if you want, but this looks like Rebecca Bennett was sold to everybody everywhere.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking, I'm sure, a lot tonight about these congressional districts that are made up of multiple counties and where candidate strengths come from one county or multiple counties. And really what's striking about this map is that Bennett made the case and voters bought it across the district. There was no weak spot. There was no county that chose to go in a different direction. She made the case across the district. And I think it gives her a good head start that she doesn't have to consolidate the party behind her going forward.
And this is, I mean, we know that Brian Varela had the ballot slogans in Sussex and in Warren. So you could argue that in those places, it didn't, the slogan didn't hold. So we have to, I don't know these numbers are ever going to answer the question of did they not hold there, but they held everywhere else, or did at the end of the day did Bennett not need to invest several months of her time working the conventions? I guess it all is part of the whole package. So you can't say that there were any mistakes there, but as you look to the future, people are going to have to think, do they want to lose a couple months of campaigning in order to play that insider game? But this is impressive. And by the way, you look at the Tom Kean primary, when he had Republican primaries, that's sort of where we came. I mean, Joey had a tweet about the similarity of Kane's number when he first ran and Bennett's, and they were just about equal. And the Kane primary map sort of looked like this too, that he had simply just closed the deal with members of the party. There's question here is if there were less candidates. I don't think there's any, and I'm simply talking about things that I've heard people say during the week. I don't think if any one of those candidates hadn't proceeded that it would have benefited the other two. I think it probably would have, some of those votes would have gone on to Bennett. And I don't think this is a repudiation of Brian Varela and Michael Roth. They've this was just not in the cards for them. I think there'll be a greater discussion about whether Tina Shah has any future. Whether it's for the 21st district one of the legislative seats going down the road. She lives in Westfield now, or did her going negative on Bennett, have a long-term effect? I mean, Zach, do you see? I mean, there's not much to analyze here. I mean, it's just Bennett.
I do want to go back to your question about whether it was worth it for Bennett to spend time on the conventions, because for me, the answer, and I don't know how she would feel. For me, the answer would be yes, because
of course yes, because you had to go to all these conventions.
Yeah, but okay, so if she doesn't go to these conventions, where does she go in February, January, March? Because even in the lead up to the June primary day, it's not like a lot of these events are getting huge crowds anyway. And so I think any place where a group of influential Democrats shows up, and it doesn't even have to be like an actual county chairman to be an influential Democrat. It can be just someone who is active on Facebook groups on their and these are the places where people like that end up. Being active at those places is how you get your foot in the door, especially in those early stages in January, February, March. Because if not, and she's just saying, hey, everyone come to my coffee shop meet and greet in January 28th. And who's going to go? Is it going to get influential Democrats looking at her. I mean, like we saw it with Mayor Baraka. He ran for governor last year, ended up finishing second in the primary, and that started with some surprisingly good results, even if they weren't victories at county conventions, because that's where a lot of the momentum can build, even if you aren't winning a slogan. Yeah. And also because if I want to go to these conventions, make it worth it.
Right. Yeah. I've got kind of a whole thesis about what party support means these days, and I don't know how well I'll be able to articulate it, but I feel like this result that we see on the map in front of us happened in part because of the county party endorsements. Like, I think that having that organizational strength meant something. I think that, having the ability early on in the campaign to say, I am the near unified choice of local Democrats, made it so that the other candidates in the race had less oxygen, had less of an ability to turn to DC Democrats and say, look at me, I'm the official Morris County Democratic candidate. This is still a real race. Like, don't just treat Bennett like she's already the nominee. So I think it kind of narrowed the lane there. Zach, do you want to jump in?
Other than fundraising, I think it's the easiest way for someone to legitimize their campaign.
Right. It made Bennett the person. And everybody else then from there on had to contrast themselves with her rather than simply be their own candidate doing their own thing. I mean, Varela had to be, I'm the true progressive. And Shaw had to go negative on TV, and it didn't even come close to working. But I also think that she won those party endorsements in part because of the result that you're seeing here. Her campaign was always the best organized and the best able to just sort of get this kind of result, the best able to sway voters who had never heard of any of these candidates before this year, right? I mean, I think that's a key dynamic here is the sort of, I'm running against the party machine choice. That's something that pretty much any candidate who doesn't get the line will inevitably eventually turn to. But it sticks a lot more when it's somebody who can be actually easily linked to the establishment. Like, it was brutal for Tammy Murphy because there was a genuine narrative of she's with the establishment. She's only getting this because she's the wife of Phil Murphy, whatever. Here, this is 4 equally unknown candidates who all had to make their pitches kind of on even footing. And the critical mass of party people decided they liked Bennett's pitch best. And that's how it went. That's how she got this. And the fact that she was able to do that with a bunch of Hunterdon County Committee members in February I think you can draw a direct line to that between that and convincing tens of thousands of Democratic primary voters on Tuesday.
So I think you guys are convincing me that in a congressional race, there's some overwhelming reasons. We'll see next year whether it's the same thing when you're running for the state assembly or county commissioner.
Well, I mean, it depends on what your strategy is, right? Like Adam Hamilton, we'll get to him in a second, but he didn't make any real effort he showed up at the county conventions in his district, but he didn't make any real effort to win them because that was never going to be his path.
And also look at the people who have skipped county conventions. We saw last year that Steve Fulop skipped county conventions, but usually he was still there. He was still present because he realized this is where influential Democrats can be. And so my name isn't going to be on the ballot, but I want them to know my name and to hear my pitch because these are people who can comment on a Facebook group in Sussex County Democrats United. I like Steve Fulop and we should all check him out, and it can have a cascading effect.
And that's why he's the governor.
But what
wow, that was funny. Look, the other thing is you look at these numbers, percentage wise, the Union County Democrats have a real organization. It's and have learned how to turn some of their votes out, and that was her best county. She won Union County by 29 points. That's where having an organization buy in that is and I'm not diminishing anything, but a little bit more than Facebook groups and social media chatter, but the ability to put together hundreds of canvassers on a weekend and going out and doing the door knocks and the door hangers and all the things that they do. That clearly, they were watching the same TV ads. They were, seeing, somewhat similar digital. They were, they're probably seeing the same mail, but there's clearly the party organization there is a little bit a little bit stronger. And it's interesting. The only other county in this district that is controlled by Democrats is Somerset, and that was Bennett's weakest county. She won that by 19 points. I know it's hard to say it's a weakness when you win it by 19.
Warren was by a significant margin her weakest.
Yeah.
But
well, yeah, that's true. That's true. But I'm saying of the of the two that have where the Democrats are in control of county government and should have sort of a I don't know, we're allowed to use the machine word anymore, but have a I mean, we all talk about this all the time. There is a difference, a very definite difference between an organization and a club and two people with iPhones in a diner booth that each have 6 different handles on social media. And what you saw is that Rebecca Bennett, I think she had it all. I think she had the organizations. I think she had the clubs. I think she had the 2 people in the diner booth. And there's no bad news here, but the reality is, and Congressman Kane on Tuesday, right before the polls closed, put out a statement that he was going to be a couple more weeks. Wasn't quite ready. When I spoke to him a couple weeks ago, it was going to be a couple weeks. But I don't think anybody should count out Tom Kane and the Republicans in this district. And I know the Kane team is raring to go, and Rebecca Bennett, basically, this is just the first, part of this was almost preseason. Right now, she's made the team. She's going to the primary, to the general, and what was it? Probably about roughly 870 people win major party nominations for the U.S. House of Representatives every year, and
169. These Republicans have no one in CD8.
Yeah, and they have a fusion party candidate there, but the reality is half the people that win primaries don't get to serve in Congress. So there's a very that reality here. This is going to be a fantastic race to cover. And one to watch, and a lot of a whole lot of we don't know yet's going on in that race.
David, you asked the question how much, or whether you play for the county parties' endorsements or not. And if you're playing for them, what you want is to achieve the map, obviously, that she was able to achieve, which is big, solid mass of purple. It doesn't help you so much, as we're going to see in 12, if you get one of multiple counties, right? That's not a clear, almost unifying voice, recognizing that she didn't have the 2 smallest organizations in the county, but in the district. But if you are running not for the organization's endorsements and support, then this map is the one that you don't want to face. This is the one that you are scared of because or fearful of because it means that somebody else has achieved this unified voice and unified recommendation of the party, and so you want to do all you can to thwart that if you can, but she was able to achieve cross party lines and across county lines and across the district, and that's the scenario that you want if you are going for these endorsements. Yeah. That's the one that matters. It's the only one that matters at this point.
Yeah, and the other thing I should point out in 7 is we didn't have a lot of polling, and the polling was really, really horrible in 2025. The polls we saw here weren't bad, and
but they all did undershoot Bennett. I mean, I think that there was clearly just sort of like I don't know how much of it was late breaking versus how much of it was just the polls not catching it, but.
I do get the sense, because it didn't really undershoot like a lot of that's just going to be late breakers for Bennett is the sense that I get. But that's how it felt the momentum was going, and so all of the undecided in those just breaking, because that's what we've seen from New Jersey voters lately, especially in what's expected to be competitive general elections. We saw Mikey Sherrill get a lot of late breakers, Rebecca Bennett get a lot of late breakers. And so these margins have been even wider than we've expected after.
And we'll talk about. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the one poll that was definitely off of the consensus was the Tina Shaw internal that had Bennett only up by a couple of points, and I got some flack after publishing that, being like, this poll is full of nonsense. There's no way it's going to look anything like this, and I don't know what they did to pump those numbers up. And I indeed do not know what they did to pump those numbers up, but that poll definitely was not quite an accurate reflection of reality. I think it caught Shaw's vote total pretty near to reality, and it undershot Bennett by like 20 points. So,
well, can I want to use this forum to bitch a little bit about something, and that was the science super PAC poll. It was 314. And they put out numbers. They were supporting Tina Shaw, and they put out a portion of their poll that showed Tina Shaw leading Tom Kean Jr. In order to make the electability case. And then, surprise, after the primary, they released the Bennett head-to-head numbers against Kean, and she was running stronger. She was beating Kean by, she had a better number than Tina Shaw, and quite frankly, I think that was, I think that was a crappy thing to do.
I'm hereby calling on this forum right now. I'm calling right now. Sorry, I'm calling right now, hereby right now, this for the 314 PAC to release the Varela and Michael Roth numbers that are presumably out there.
I
just want to know.
I'm pretty sure that we know what the full poll is, and I think they only asked about those two.
Yeah. But the reality is that's not really a credible move on the part of 314 to put out a poll knowing you're just sort of manipulating those numbers to try and do a last minute bid for the candidate. And guess what, 314 people who did a phenomenal job for Herb Conaway 2 years ago, but it didn't help their candidate. Tina Shaw wasn't at 10 until 314 leaked the poll number. And now they're just coming out of this looking a little, a little sleazy. And that's not where the scientists and engineers poll ought to be.
But they did go 1 for 2 in New Jersey. Because they did also support Hemingway, and they got a win with that. Right.
And I believe that they had head-to-head matchups with Greg Mealy that showed that Hemingway was gonna beat him, and I said I was going to bitch about it. I have bitched about it. If anybody disagrees, you can say it, but I don't think any of you are going to, it doesn't look like any of you are, you don't have your disagreeable faces on. So anything more on 7? Should we go to 12?
I don't know how much to make out of, I tweeted about this. I did the numbers, but Kean, a number of Republican voters in the primary did withhold their votes from Kean, about 12%. I don't know what to make out of that, but if he has any defection among Republicans going into the fall, of course, we hope that there will be better answers. We hope he will be back at work. We hope there'll be all the full disclosure at that point. So maybe things will change. But as of right now, there are a number of Republicans who did not support him in the primary. So that, that could be trouble for him in the fall if that continues.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, Joey had a story on I don't remember my days of the week anymore, Wednesday, about the independent candidates. And, I want to see what kind of petition challenges are coming up in the next couple days, because there are candidates that could take votes away from major party candidates. Randall Terry, who's a nationally known pro-life leader, who, by the way, lives in Tennessee, and I don't know, maybe FIFA thinks that Tennessee and the TN,
New York, New Jersey, Tennessee World Cup.
Yeah. Maybe they're drawing their lines a little differently, but
the NJ Transit ride to there is going to be a son of a gun.
We will sell you a chicken.
I got to tell you, Zach, it can't be any worse. It can't be any worse than going, into Manhattan. So you never know. But
it's probably gonna be cheaper than a ride to East Rutherford.
Could be. It could be.
And you're right, David. Though I mean, every pro-life voter who's a committed pro-life person will certainly know that name on the ballot. Will recognize that name on the ballot.
Yeah, and
if they're looking for an alternative.
And his wife, Teresa, why am I drawing a blank on her name? And I just had
Teresa Bukovinec,
who ran for president as the pro-life candidate.
Which, by the way, I believe that she only appeared on New Jersey ballot. She is not from New Jersey, but I think that the only one of the 50 states she appeared on in 2024 was New Jersey.
Well, that's because
Jersey is a known figure only to us.
Yeah, but Jersey is one of these states where it's still, even though they changed the law, relatively easy to get on the ballot. But the bottom line is she and Randall Terry, both pro-life presidential candidates, they got married, I think, last year. They both live in Tennessee, and she's running in the 8th district, and I don't want to joke about this because Tom Kean can't afford to lose 1% of the vote to Randall Terry, because that's just coming off completely off his numbers, and then in the 7th you've got Seamus Patrick O'Toole. He lives in Clark, and his slogan is "Stop Israel's Genocide," and that puts him in a different place on Middle East issues than Rebecca Bennett, but she can't afford to lose a percentage point to an independent candidate there, and there's a libertarian candidate, and if that libertarian candidate comes out with a 0.5% or 1%, in what could be a very close race. I remind everybody in 2020 when it was Malinowski-Kane and it was a percentage point, there were no independent candidates because that was the COVID year, and it was tough to go out and gather the signatures. Even though it was online. Jim Devine, great job. But it was just a 2-person race. This is a little different, and I want to see if there's challenges. O'Toole is at 299 signatures, so they've got to disqualify 50 of them if anybody goes and challenges it. And boy, and I'm not commenting on anything about the issues other than the fact that given Clark's recent political history, I'm surprised he chose to live in that town with this slogan. But I'm not diminishing the potential spoiler effect of independent candidates if this turns out to be a really close race.
Yeah, just as a reminder, Mikey Sherrill carried this district last year by 2 points. So
right.
We're talking about that kind of a potential split.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump carried it by 1 point, I believe, with less than 50% of the vote. So,
yeah. So this is, look, Trump wasn't losing huge numbers of pro-life votes, and this is something we'll know, probably by tomorrow or so. I don't, by tomorrow whether these are going to be challenges, and then this could be in court in the much more efficient administrative law division of New Jersey's judiciary. This could be in court as early as first thing Monday morning. So we'll get some answers to that if there's any challenges. Let's go to
David. You wrote about this. I'm sorry. Randall would simply have to, or his wife would have to establish residency if they were elected.
Right. Well, Joey wrote the story.
Oh, Joey wrote it. Sorry.
But look. Here's the reality for those,
Oh, I mean, he's not
for those who don't because we all joke about how people don't read the bylines at the New Jersey Globe all the time. But the for those who don't know, this is a constitutional issue. To run for the United States Senate or House of Representatives only, you don't have to be a resident of the state. You don't ever have to be a resident of your district, but you have to be a resident of the state by election day. And we saw that with Hillary Clinton 26 years ago when she ran for the U.S. Senate. She was in the race before she'd established New York residency, and she was living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for the duration of that campaign, but she had established residency. And Joey and I talked about this earlier this week. What does that mean, right? I mean, they're not going to win. So what's the penalty to Randall Terry if he never actually moves to New Jersey by election day? It's not like people will have been voting for 6 weeks by mail with his name on the ballot. They'll have 9 days of early voting. And what's going to happen, and I'm going to create a ludicrous scenario here. Somebody goes to court on election day and says, Randall Terry's not living here. And a judge is going to say, what do you want me to do? Because the deputy attorney general may even take a position on this and say, it's too late. We can't do anything about it. So the worst case scenario is for Randall Terry is if he wins and he's elected to Congress, which he's not going to be, and tries to go take his seat, but hadn't met that constitutional requirement of establishing residency by election day, then they could refuse to seat him in the House. I don't think that's going to be a real problem for him.
And think about how many people are named Dan Sullivan across the country who could file in Alaska without having to set foot in there for a long. It's a weird little loophole.
Yeah, but
do you guys think our viewers were like, boy, I hope they spend 10 minutes talking about Randall Terry today?
I have to tell you
That's
something.
What I want to hear about.
Joey, I'm going to say this is the segue into the 12th. I spend a lot of time understanding those who watch this, and there will be some who will agree with you. But there's a whole lot of people right now paying careful attention to this because it's something they really hadn't thought about and they want to understand it. This live stream is not for pedestrians. This live stream is for those that are hyper focused on the nuances of New Jersey politics. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm waiting for. The Globe's friend Ben Wishna of the George Washington University. So I'm now looping Zach into this.
Raise high.
Strongly approves, he said, of talking about Randall Terry here. Okay. So Joey, public opinion's not going your way on this.
I am with you.
1-0.
Yeah. I am with you that it is a potentially significant development.
Yeah. All right, let's go to District 12.
So I made this map earlier today. If you're looking at this and thinking, I have no idea how to read that, I made it and I barely know how to read it. This was an almost impossible district to map because 8 different candidates won at least one town. If you told me that is the first time in New Jersey history that has ever happened in a single congressional district election, either general or primary, where 8 different candidates won at least one town, I would believe you. Because I can't think of any other instance where a situation like this would have developed before.
And Joey, I took your challenge.
Okay.
I thought about a couple, and I could have gotten it up to 6 in the 1974 5th District primary if you were willing to include 2 Republicans in that race who each won a town.
Nope.
Not quite.
The commissioner has ruled. This discussion's over. So go ahead, Joe.
So I can flip between the maps, but I do think that the more instructive map here by far is this other one that I made that shows the relative support for each of the 6 candidates. I guess we didn't do an introduction to the race at all. The context here is that Adam Hamwi, on his first campaign for office, he's a very, very progressive, pro-Palestine in particular, plastic surgeon and U.S. Army veteran. He helped save Tammy Duckworth's life. He volunteered to provide medical aid in Gaza. There's also all kinds of stories floating around about him and his testimony in the 90s with the blind sheik. And he's a man of many facets and with many tales to tell. And he just kind of closed out this race early, I think before anyone even realized that he was one of the main contenders. He just started kind of laying down the law. He got his name on the TVs early. He had a super PAC supporting him. He had all kinds of national progressive support. And then you can see all of his opponents had incredibly splintered, regionalized bases that they could kind of turn to for a bunch of votes there. But then they completely flopped everywhere else. Like to the degree that, I think Brad Cohen is one of the most striking examples of this, where you've got him, you can see that dark purple in his home of East Brunswick, where he's the mayor, and then next door Monroe, where he's getting nearly a majority of the vote in with 13 candidates on the ballot. But then, you look at, I'm trying to get the spreadsheet now to find an example. You go to Trenton, which is one of the other big, vote hubs in the district, obviously, and he's getting 2% of the vote. He's a non-factor. Nobody in Trenton even knew about him. And that was just sort of replicated all across the district, where you had people who knew their neighbors and maybe in some cases had party support or had other kinds of institutional support in certain areas. And it did not extend beyond that. And only we had the truly district-wide coalition. And the result was, I'll put the main map back up, really convincing victory. No one even came close. I'm not sure if there was any real way to stop this. I mean, I should say there were ways to produce a different result. There were definitely strategies that his opponents could have used to try to bring that margin down. There could have been some consolidation. There could have been spending against him. But the reality of the race as it stands, I mean, he was just going to sail to an easy victory. And I think that's something that he and his backers were certainly not expecting at the beginning of the race. I think they were expecting a much harder fight than this. And now you're going to have this congressman from this district who is going to be probably in, the 10 most left-wing members of the entire United States Congress.
So walk through this, I'm looking at this. This is the first time I'm seeing. I saw your story today. Is the first time that I'm really looking at some town by town numbers. So Sam Wong won Princeton, his hometown.
He also won Pennington.
And I guess that's and he didn't win the Princeton Democratic Community Organization convention. So there's clearly a relationship that he's got with voters there. Either that or Deborah Poritz has a lot more sway in a Democratic congressional primary than I thought she would, since she's the one who got him his job, on redistricting.
I don't know how much sway it is, David. I think that there was an awful lot of, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. I think there was an awful lot of money being thrown against Sue Altman, and the people in the race, the candidates in the race who were not favorite son candidates from each county, the voters who were looking for a progressive, who were looking for an alternative to Hamwi. There was just so much dirt that was being thrown out there on Altman that I think Wang became the alternative to that. I think he became the next choice to that for many voters in Princeton and in places like Pennington. He just became the viable alternative, the easier, cleaner alternative.
Yeah, I think what we'll wind up seeing is, I don't know if it's too soon to use the A word, autopsy, for Democrats right now and how they're going to look at this, but Wong, it's not like, I don't think he raised, really sort of in the vicinity of where Reynolds, Jackson, and Robinson were. He may have spent it smarter. He may have, been, I'll use a Sam term here, but more scientific on how he did this. It might have been more careful targeting digitally as opposed to, he did a couple mailers, but he didn't really have, and by the way, in terms of raw votes, Joey, difference between the difference in actual votes between Wong and Altman, third and sixth wasn't significant. I mean,
you had a clear winner here. You had a decently clear second place, although it's not like Brad Cohen came anywhere close to winning. And then you had this big group of Sam Wong, Chanel Robinson, Verlina Reynolds-Jackson, and Sue Altman, who are all just sort of bunched up with a decent showing, but not anything to sort of write home about.
Yeah. I mean, this is, it raises some questions, a lot of questions regarding the future. You still have somebody who's going to Congress, and make no mistake. Sorry, Greg Mealy, but this was a big Harris, big Sherrill district. And Adam Hamway's going to Congress. He's going to be a congressman on January 3rd. And he's doing so having gotten 28% of his party's support. There's a couple questions that I have for you. I'll start with this one. They're in no particular order, but I think it's appropriate to ask this question in a 13 candidate primary won by somebody by 28 points, 28 with 28% of the vote in Andrew Zwicker's home district, where he once ran for this seat. What would, I'll start with Micah. What would ranked choice voting have looked like in the 12th district?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me what would the field have looked like if Andrew Zucker ran?
I think it would have totally been a different race.
Yeah. Correct.
You wouldn't have had as many candidates if Andrew Zwicker ran. I don't necessarily know that Brad Cohen would have ran, but I don't necessarily think Reynolds Jackson or Robinson or maybe even Sue Altman. Zwicker had a big base there, and he had an ability to raise a lot of money. But I'm looking at his. I'm putting the context.
I'll answer you. I'll answer you. I believe, and very interested in what everybody else thinks, but I believe Hamway probably still would have won this race because he turned out to be where he didn't eke out over the favorite son. He was still a strong number two. So my feeling is he would have been a first or second choice for many voters across the district. So I think the result might have been the same. But that is sort of a cautionary tale that those who think ranked choice voting might be a panacea to get more consensus for nominating somebody. That could be the case. It certainly may not have produced a different end result.
I think that this district, had Andrew Zwicker gotten in and been the unified party choice, rather than each party just going its separate way and finding its own sort of, I don't mean to be mean to them, but I think in this context is correct, B-tier candidate to sort of take up the mantle instead, then I think this race would have been entirely different. But in the context of the race as it existed, where you had all of these candidates who were splintering the vote in their respective areas, I think that ranked choice voting would have, in the final round, produced something like a 70% to 30% Hamway versus Cohen victory or something like that. Because, put yourself into the head of a voter in Trenton who, knows and loves Verlina Reynolds-Jackson, so she's your easy first choice vote. And then you're thinking about who do you put for your second choice vote. Those voters are not choosing Brad Cohen, a man they've never heard of, as their second choice. But they might be putting Adam Hamway, the nice smiling doctor that they've seen on their TV a few times and who says that he, supports universal healthcare and abolishing ICE. That sounds like things that they like. So sure, they'll put Reynolds Jackson first, but they'll put Adam Hamway second or third. And I think that kind of calculation would just be repeated ad infinitum. The only sort of hard anti-Hamway people are, more moderate Democrats, maybe Jewish Democrats, and otherwise voters who are paying close attention to the race and have some concerns with him personally. But I just don't think that you get a majority with that. I don't think that the fact that he only got 28% means that there was some kind of grand 72% anti-Hamway coalition. I just think that it was a whole bunch of voters making independent choices, and he was the one who is the most broadly acceptable to all.
So you look at Mejia, I agree mostly with Joey, but I'll just add on, we saw with Mejia, is did Mejia winning less than a majority in a primary win mean that there was, a massive portion who wouldn't support her, and we saw Tuesday that wasn't the case. I forget what she got. She got something like 80%, right? And had a challenger or two.
Yeah.
And so 2 challengers, 83%. There's not enough evidence here to suggest that Democrats would have coalesced against Hamilton if he were.
And look,
No.
one of go ahead,
There's
Mike.
nothing to suggest that because nobody laid a hand on him, right? I mean, yes, there were absolutely some hard stories written about him for sure, but there was zero advertising. We talked about this last week. The other candidates were gun shy, with the exception of Adrian Mapp, about going after him. Nobody advertised about him. So where were the voters in Trenton supposed to get the controversies of Adam Hamilton? They weren't. It was invisible to them.
Right, and that's the thing is those political junkies all knew about this, and people are talking about it on the inside, but we will never know what this race would have been like if people put substantial resources behind an anti-Hamilton message. And that gets me to another question, which is, you saw this in the 7th district with Rebecca Bennett. Not that not that she was that was a close race, and you saw it with Adam Hamilton, where they literally came out of nowhere. They started at zero because friends and family doesn't really get you to 1%, and they ran good campaigns. Bennett started very early. Hamilton, Joey, you remember when he actually got in?
It's like January 15th or something like that.
Yeah,
so pretty late.
Yeah, so basically, a little over 5 months of his time, and he's going to be a congressman. But I think one of the lessons for how this might change New Jersey politics going forward, maybe even going into legislative races, is if you allow somebody to go from zero to winner without trying to stop them, other than the social media stuff and speaking inside the bubbles. Once you allow them to take the lead, it's very hard to knock them out. And there's going to be a lot of questions about whether Hamilton could have been taken out or not, or look, he's we didn't talk about this with Bennett, so I'll lump these in very quickly. Year 2 of great story does well with voters, and Rebecca Bennett, Navy helicopter pilot and mom in a driving a is it a Toyota or a Honda? But very, 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 very old car. And
2010
connecting.
Not that old, you guys.
Look,
it drives. It's a good car.
Yeah, but
I can say that one.
Not that.
But look, the reality is, you want to talk about connecting with middle class voters. I'm a mom and affordability. I struggle with affordability, and I'm driving a 16-year-old car. That's a great way to connect with voters. You've got Hamilton, and we'll never know whether how these negatives would have played if people put huge money on, and whether they put it in early. But great resume for him, right? I mean, he is a surgeon, and he was an Army combat surgeon. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserves. Saved Senator Tammy Duckworth's life. went and to Gaza and volunteered his time in a combat field hospital, we're really looking at resumes mattering. And the other thing, but the question that I wanted to get to is going forward, if you get somebody that you haven't heard of before and they're starting to connect and they're starting to do well and people like them and it's a great story and they're good on the campaign trail, do you agree you can't, even if you're running for local office, you can't let somebody come out of nowhere and seize a lead if your Oppo book has stuff in it?
It's almost like the race was too big. If this is a two-person race, if it's Hamilton versus like any of the other ones, and he starts gaining a little momentum, I think it's a lot easier to justify just on your own personal campaign side, opening the checkbook out and starting some of those negatives or signaling that you want them if you want to wink to a pack. But when we talked about it last week a little bit of, if you start a series of attack ads like Tina Shaw did, will it backfire? Will it only galvanize people against you? Will you get the benefit of those votes? And so when you're in a 13-person field and you're trying to raise your own name identification among voters, it might just be you hope someone else does the spending for you and tries to knock it down. Otherwise, it's you're the one lifting the rest of the field up. It's the math when the fields get big get really weird.
There's also the sort of, we haven't fully discussed this, like the asymmetricality of the super PAC spending, where, I think every candidate in this race kind of wanted basically to run their own race and make their own pitch to voters. They didn't particularly want it to be some big negative thing. And also, the people in this race, they don't really have longtime rivalries with each other. I don't get the sense that any of them started the race particularly disliking each other or sort of wanting to take one another down, which is, say, different from the 11th district earlier this year, where there were a lot of longtime rivalries that kind of surfaced there. And so if everybody's just kind of making their case and putting their name out there and doing their canvassing stuff, and then one of them happens to also have $1.5 million being spent on the air to do the extra work for him, then that's of course going to produce an advantage that's going to be really hard for anyone else to overcome. And I know pretty much for a fact that super PAC spending was planned as the preemptive wave of pro-Hamilton spending to counter the inevitable entrance of other PACs into the race, either attacking Hamilton or boosting other candidates. And then for, I think, a mix of reasons that just never arrived. Jewish Insider talked with, I asked them for the APAC for comment and they never got back to me, but they talked to Jewish Insider and gave them a quote about how, they were looking at this race, but they didn't really see a path to victory against Hamilton, and they didn't know who they would support, even if they wanted to, because the field was so splintered. So that kind of took APAC out of the equation. And then looking at, I remember the Illinois primaries that were full of these sort of hard to parse crypto and AI ad spends, backing candidates who obviously that was not their main focus, but they were willing to put a line on their website being like, and I like AI, and that was good for $2 million of super PAC spending. I was kind of expecting something like that to happen here, and it never did either. Instead, all of that spending arrived to boost Rob Menendez for some reason. So yeah, I think that the fact that you were able to have, against all odds, this super PAC just putting stuff on the air completely uncontested for several weeks, and then even in the final weeks of the campaign, when other campaigns started activating, it still was kind of too little, too late. That seems like one of the biggest, if not the biggest, single sort of factors in the situation that you saw here.
Yeah, Sue Altman had a $400,000 infusion from the 218 PAC, Project 218, but it was literally last weekend. And
yeah, I haven't even seen the ad in question. I don't even know what they were spending it on.
Because how do you do that? And how do you get an ad produced and placed and going and reinforce it, and voters see it a number of times before Election Day? None of that is going to happen.
And voters had already been voting?
Many voters had already voted. Thousands of voters had already voted. It's just, it's too, as Joey said, too little, too late.
Yeah, and they all, and I'm, this is not, I'm not sending a message to any of the New Jersey candidates, but all this complaining about Citizens United and what the effects of super PACs are, and the anonymity behind. I mean, it's not just the contributors. It's they don't. It's the they're operating out of post office boxes and Staples stores with names of people that you can't even find, and there's this is something that could be done as a correction, or a requirement that you use a real address and you identify who opened the bank account, and
put an email address that the FEC actually checks to see if anybody ever responds. The number of completely useless emails I have sent to super PACs being like, would you like to comment on this? Expecting absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I even have an email requirement.
Exactly. And the other thing, we won't know about this race. And I mean, Hamilton ran a magnificent campaign. I think it was flawless in terms of his execution, of his anticipation of what was to come. He was, for a guy who's never run for office before, he didn't make any mistakes. I look at 4, 5, and 4, 5, and 6 here: Robinson, Reynolds, Jackson, and Altman. I look at a block there that we're on issues, and we saw this at the debate, and we've seen it through the campaign. Not a whole lot of difference in terms of positions on issues between Robinson, Reynolds, Jackson, and Altman, but they were all in the race, and the combined votes. And yes, I know it doesn't mean that because you were for Altman, you would go for something different. But if there was some, if there was some reduction in the field, Robinson plus Reynolds, Jackson plus Altman puts you just a couple hundred votes behind Hamilton. So we'll never know if in the post-line era, where a couple of county chairs got together and said we can't all be everywhere. You had Robinson with the endorsement in Somerset. You had Reynolds Jackson with the endorsement in Mercer. You had Cone in Middlesex, and you had Mayor Adrian Mapp in Union County, which is just Plainfield, his city. If those chairs had gotten together and said, we need to figure this out, we'll never know how that outcome would have changed either. But this was, we said it from the very beginning, this was going to be a great campaign to watch, and it was.
In addition, though, to the great campaign that Hamilton ran, and he did. I had students who were following his race from the beginning, who were excited about his race. Muslim students. I had an alum who wound up working on his campaign, and they really were genuinely excited about the guy and his bio and all those good feelings. So it was impressive to see him sort of come out of nowhere. But when the party chairs don't get together, when they don't figure it out, it's almost like just at the same time the parties have lost their line and they've lost their ability to screen and to vet. They're going from that loss of power, and they're further dividing their power into as small bite-sized pieces as whatever they have left. Yeah. And it's sort of like, can we further reduce what we just lost on top of that by slicing and dicing it?
And they were all going after the same dollars. They were all trying to raise money. If you suddenly put Robinson and Reynolds Jackson and Altman's money together, which I know is, again, not that easy. It might have changed things, but they didn't have the resources. None of them had the resources that Hamilton wound up putting together. And Brad Cone, I don't think he ran a very good campaign, and certainly not a modern 2026 campaign. where he was still in a full-time medical practice and not out campaigning. And I mean, the guy was in Queens on Sunday. Again, not FIFA map, but Queens is not part of New Jersey. I think that's that's a little bit interesting. The other thing I found really interesting with Brad Cohen is he's a 3-term mayor of East Brunswick. He does very well there, but in a Democratic primary running for Congress, he got 47% of the vote, 47% of the vote, and that's not good in your hometown. And he got like 2,700 votes, and Hamilwy in East Brunswick was got about 1,700. So Cohen needed to come out of his home. He needed to come out of East Brunswick and Monroe, huge turnout and with like 80% of the vote, and he couldn't do that.
We talked about this last week, David. A fair number of those Middlesex voters who the organization does such a great job of turning out to vote by mail, a fair number of those were Hamilwy votes that they turned out.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the strongest organizations in the state, but it wasn't an ability to take a small town mayor. Again, if it was Andrew Zwicker, would have been different, would have been easier, would have been more credible. But Brad Cohen, I look at these numbers in his in the 18th legislative district portion and how he did, and if Senator Pat Duggan decided that he wasn't going to run again next year, there's nothing in these numbers that say that Brad Cohen's a really good candidate to run for an open state Senate seat, because somebody else can come in and just he doesn't look as good as a state Senate candidate this year as he might have last year. Go ahead.
One other thought that I've been kind of thinking is, like, I feel like there's a few primary results this year, including the 11th district from earlier this year, that show there's a certain benefit to sort of being maximalist at something. And here, I think Hamilwy and Mejia both sort of were maximalist on the left, where, not to say that they were, the farthest left politician in America, but they pretty clearly staked out the most left-wing lane in the primary, and no one really contested them for it, right? Nobody was really making the argument to voters in this district that actually they were even more progressive than Adam Hamilwy, because that wouldn't be credible, because it wasn't really true. And the same with Mejia in the 11th. And then two other big Democratic primary victories this year with Rebecca Bennett and then Zach Malak in
we're gonna get that next.
district. I wouldn't necessarily say that they maximalized being moderate, because I don't think either of those primaries were overwhelmingly ideological, but they sort of were the maximum electability argument, right? Yeah. Both of them leaned really, really heavily into being the best shot of flipping those districts in November, while their opponents got more bogged down in ideological battles, and they were trying to maybe position themselves to their left, trying to say, well, this person won't say abolish ICE, but I'll say abolish ICE, kind of stuff. And that didn't really work. So I think that, and you see, I feel like Stu Altman is the clearest example of the 12th district of someone who tried to thread the needle, was neither, the most left-wing candidate and didn't want to be, but also was clearly a progressive and still aiming for those votes. And she just got squeezed. There just aren't a huge number of voters who are looking for left-wing, but not that left. Like it usually, especially in a crowded field, it usually redounds to your benefit to be the most of something.
Yeah.
And I think I can, go ahead, Zach.
I think the division of the progressives specifically, and I think we've seen this NJ11 governor's race, NJ12 now, where they're sort of, since the line's gone, there's sort of two different brands of progressivism that we've seen on a major stage in the state. And I wrote about this over the weekend. I thought it was a good article, so check it out. But the first brand, it's sort of the Ras Braga, Ana Lilia Mejia, Adam Hamilwy brand, where it is working class focused. It is anti-machine, but not like necessarily like that's their focus in a way that it is for people like Altman and Fulop. It is it connects with voters of color more. And then the second brand, which we saw from Steve Phillip and Sue Altman, was sort of a more affluent, progressive, anti-machine, and focuses on the process, makes less connections in terms of the economy and with voters of color. And we've seen the first brand really show a higher ceiling in these races than the Sue Altman brand. Because when Sue Altman joined this race, I thought a lot of us expected her to be more of a force than she ended up being.
Speaking of the working brand of progressive, I could not help notice that the Working Families Party was completely absent in this race, and maybe they felt their loyalties were divided. Maybe they felt like their former director on the one hand, but the other one was that a lot of their supporters were going Hamaway's direction, but they played a very big role in Mejia's race. They were almost nowhere to be found here. And, there's actually some races where that American Priorities PAC that spent all that money against her, there are some races where they're working across the country with the Working Families Party. So, I think a lot of the oxygen was snuffed out for Altman on where she could go, the natural places where she had support in the Kane race, in her prior race, that she just didn't have, that were closed off to her this time.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Chanel Robinson, Berlina Reynolds Jackson. These are quality candidates. There's no doubt about that. But I do have to say, when I look at Sue Altman, it raises interesting questions about the loyalty of organizations. In Sue's defense, she ran the progressive movement in New Jersey for 10 years, helping them to get organized. She's the one who put the funding together to finally challenge the constitutionality of the line, which made a permanent difference in New Jersey. She's the one who she's the one who got carried out of a legislative hearing on the EDA by state police. Who stood up to powerful people who have continued to spend money against her, and all of these people that she fought for. And I'm going to get, I'm going to catch some crowd, some abuse on this, I'm sure. But where's the appreciation of progressives for what she did for them? It's very much, and you see it on the right too. It's very much a "what have you done for me lately?" kind of voter. And I can imagine that Sue Altman is frustrated by this, and deservedly so. Before we move on to a different race, because I want to do that, some candidates, I thought Jay Vangenkirk came on, at his launch very strong. He's young, as all his opponents stated at the debate, but he got a little under 2,200 votes. I still think there is a future for him, and I don't how it's got to suck a little bit to be Kyle Little, who came in dead last. 0.6 of a point behind a guy who dropped out of the race nearly 4 months ago.
Not 4 months ago. It was in April. But but the reason for that, by the way, the reason why Elijah Dixon got more votes than a guy who was not in the race at any point when voters were actually voting should have gotten, is that he appeared first on the ballot in Middlesex.
Yeah.
And they're definitely, I mean, let me check what the actual percentage he got. So he got 1.5% of the vote district-wide, but 2.3% in Middlesex. And I think that was a fair number of people just going, first name.
Yeah.
we're gonna talk about that in other races like the Republican Senate race. But I think when slogans matter, when ballot placement matters, is when voters don't know a lot else about some of the candidates, or they're looking for some clue. And ballot order mattered in some of these races. It clearly mattered for Justin Murphy, which I know we're not talking.
Yeah.
But
Well, should we talk about that now?
Let's go to District 2 right now.
Okay. We're out of
so
time,
when
guys.
you go to District 2,
I apologize to our viewers.
Joey, I want to maybe draw a bow on a comment that you made a little while ago about the difference between the moderate choice that voters made in a couple of districts and the progressive choice that voters made in other districts. I think there's a relationship there. I think the voters in those four districts, were being strategic. I think when it came to Mejia's district and when it came to Hamoui's district, there was sort of an understanding that you were free to make the choice, the progressive choice, that you were free to choose the most progressive candidate because those candidates were going to win the general election. And you were not going to imperil by choosing the most progressive candidate in the race. I think voters were also strategic when in Kane's district and in Van Drew's district, they chose the more moderate, the more broadly acceptable candidate. And I think voters are thinking ahead.
Even in Chris Smith's district, they chose the candidate who had more of a real campaign and was sort of better prepared for a completely unwinnable, but still, you want to put up your best showing possible. I totally agree that Democratic voters in particular right now, and this is something that I remarked upon even before the primary, where I was looking at other districts around the country, and in races where it seemed like there were two maybe evenly matched candidates, but one was seen as the stronger general election nominee, Democratic voters knew to hone in on that. They knew what to look for in those candidates, and they voted for them. And I think people kind of expected that to happen with Bennett. The Mullock race was more of a toss-up. I didn't know how that was going to turn out. I actually kind of thought he was the least likely nominee of the three main candidates in that race. Because he just sort of started out with lower name recognition than Tim Alexander and had less money, raised less money than Bailey Winder. And there's all kinds of factors, I think, that led to him winning that primary, one of which is that he's just really, really popular in his home turf. I was doing the calculations today, and he won 93% of the vote in Cape May City, where he's the mayor. I can't think of another instance where a candidate in a contested primary has won, like an actually competitive primary, has won 93% in a town. So that was kind of crazy to me. But I think partially, a fair number of voters in my opinion, correctly, I think that he, based on a lot of factors, is in fact the strongest nominee in this district. Mm-hmm. And voters were attuned to that.
Yeah. I mean, you look at, he came out of Cape May with no line and 70% of the vote. And, this is sort of one of the unusual things about New Jersey. Cape May has always been, and it was the key to Jeff Van Drew's success as a Democrat. Cape May is it's like everybody knows everybody there, and it's a different district than the other 11. You've got still vibrant weekly newspapers in Cape May. You have, you get to Atlantic County, Atlantic City Press, and it's been decimated, but it's still a decent newspaper, and it still has some readership. And this is, as I compare it to just, to the 12th district, what Mullock got is what Brad Cohn needed out of Middlesex. It's what Reynolds Jackson or Chanel Robinson needed out of Mercer and Somerset. It wouldn't have made a difference, but it might have changed a little bit of what's going to be in the Almanac of American Politics forever. Is Adrian Mapp's number? If he had gotten 70-80% of the vote in Plainfield instead of 48, that would have changed those numbers a little bit too. This is where where it was. The Atlantic. Go ahead.
Mullock didn't actually. I'm just doing the math. Mullock did not need Cape May County to win this race. If Cape May County, the entire county, floated off into the ocean, he still would have won in a new 5-county district where he had the line in none of the counties. Or
Yeah.
Can you put up the map? I don't think
we didn't do the map yet, right?
I haven't made a map of this. I did about half of the county calculations.
sorry.
I don't have Gloucester results. Cumberland is going to require me to add up a bunch of Vineland precincts by hand. Your home county is really needs some work.
Yeah. But so that's the secret sauce. That's the scenario in which Mullock is going to do well in the fall. Is and we've talked about this. Cumberland can certainly go Democratic. Atlantic can certainly go Democratic. Gloucester can certainly go Democratic. What's going to pull Van Drew over the top is Salem and Cape and Ocean. And if Mullock can cut into Van Drew's historic base in Cape May County, I don't think anybody expects Van Drew not to carry Cape May County. But if Mullock can get a good, decent vote out of Cape May County, if he can neutralize what Van Drew comes out of Cape May County with, then that goes a long way toward carrying the district.
Right, and right now it is a severely uphill battle, but we don't know. We don't know what the country's going to look like. I think it was Joey made the point that if they're competitive in the second district, if they can flip the second district, they will have won like 40 seats. They're not going to need. It was Bailey Winder said control of the House might come down to his race. And that's just not true. If they're playing in two, it means they have just demolished everybody. Nobody's gonna believe this. And I was looking for Jeff's palm card from 1994 to prove it, and I couldn't find it. But Jeff Van Drew, in his first race for higher office, was a bearded Democratic mayor. If that sounds familiar, that's where Mullock is starting from. He spent the entire summer meeting voters across Cape May County in front of grocery stores, knocking on doors. He had a 2-hour lunch in his dental schedule, and he'd go and walk a neighborhood. If Mullock wants to do that, and if he wants to just cut the heart out of Andrew's base as much as he possibly can, that's going to be the formula. It's going to be following right in Van Drew's footsteps. Micah, you grew up in this district.
Right.
And one of the things that it seems to me is Zach Mullock, and this should not be interpreted in any he looks and sounds like South Jersey. Like he's part of that community. And whereas Bailey Winder, D London,
they were calling it tourism campaigning. They were calling him, right? Devastating.
I wouldn't be surprised to see Winder run in, Montgomery County in 10 years in Maryland or something like that. This was clearly, easier for Zach Mullock to connect with voters because he's one of them. And I watched Amy Rosenberg from the Inquirer was at his victory party, and she recorded on her iPhone, and he's standing up there, and one of his kids was barefoot in their shorts and t-shirts and very unassuming, nothing pretentious. It wasn't the carefully put together wardrobes of what are they going to look like, what's this photo going to look like on the stage the next day when people see it. He's real second district. And I think that maybe I should have thought more about that before I said I don't know who wins the primary, because when I look at these numbers now, I sort of think maybe this is where I totally got it wrong. Maybe the reality is he was just going to win this. And
Tim Alexander, to be fair to him, is also very much of this district and sort of he has roots in this district, and he's sort of paid his dues into it. But I think also there's a certain voter fatigue with him, where I think voters feel like he's kind of gotten his chances. This is his third campaign for the seat, and he just never raised any money to actually tell everybody why he was so good this time around. Right. So I do think that, the contest between him and Mullock on kind of a who is really the salt of the earth of the second district, they both have a pretty solid claim to that. but Moloch kind of outpaced him in just all the other respects of, sort of being a compelling candidate.
Yeah, and the other thing that I just caught with numbers is that Terry Reese, who positioned herself to get the most progressive votes in this district, she got 11%. She basically got half of what Winder did on a minuscule percentage of what he spent to get it. I don't know if that's why, if maybe that's why he fought so hard in a clandestine way to knock Terry Reese out and deny her, try and have her not be a candidate. This was, we've all, Joey, Zach, you've been in New Jersey now long enough. You've seen candidates like this before. The ones that that came on strong and you'll never hear about again. The Stephanie Schmid types of people that are they had no real ties to the district other than they saw it as an opportunity in district shopping to represent it. And I'm gonna I hope you'll humor me. I won't go too long on this, but there's one thing that I noticed that just sort of I didn't really like about Winder, which was election night. There was a reporter from the Inquirer, and by the way, thank God for the Philadelphia paper in really covering this race, because the Jersey papers were not, but they had somebody at Winder headquarters, and he came out around 9:00. He was in third place. So maybe at 9:00, we didn't know yet if it was going to be Moloch or Alexander, but we knew it wasn't going to be Bailey Winder. And he walks out and it sort of panned the audience. There were probably 25 or 30 people in the room, which is not a big election night crowd. And I think what I'm about to say is sort of a metaphor for how he's going to be remembered in this race. He walks out there and he says, there's a lot of votes still to be counted. And we're looking at what's outstanding, and basically there's still a chance. And so right up to the very last minute, an hour after polls closed, and with the people that liked him the best, that cared enough to come out and be at his headquarters on election night, he couldn't even be honest with them and say, we didn't win. Enjoy the booze, enjoy the food. We didn't win, but thank you for what you did for me. He thanked him, but he still just couldn't. It was still like a slickness about him, and I guess the realization is in this particular district, and we look back, whether it was Charlie Sandman or Bill Hughes or Frank Lobiondo or Jeff Van Drew. These were people. They were home, people from there, and they weren't slick, and that's just, we should never think to ourselves that that's going to play in that district.
The other thing that's really, really important, and we could have probably thought about this in retrospect too, David, is that whatever else you might want to say about the year of the progressive and other districts, there just aren't enough of them in this district. This is a much more conservative district. And again, if you're carving it two ways, or if you're looking for if this is your strategy to win on progressive votes, there just may not be enough of them there.
Yeah. The 12 points, impressive win. Now the question going forward is, can he raise the money to put together the infrastructure that might position himself to be competitive if there's an opportunity here?
Yeah, and can he put himself on the radar, right? Can he become one of the guys who's one of the Democrats who might flip a seat, rather than just like, oh, crossing our fingers, that would be nice if we win that.
Yeah. So, we've seen people win, in waves. These districts go, but you still have to have something in place, and I mean, that's it, right? We he's now won the nomination. Let's see what he does with it, and let's see where this district is. Let's talk about. Can we go to the U.S. Senate race, the Republican U.S. Senate race? Again, this was we didn't know who was going to win, but I think there was a belief that Tabor, that it was really between Zidane and Tabor. The Murphy, I heard this from county chairs all over the place. Is they don't really know him, but what he ran, 15. I read $15,000. He's still, works full time. He, is driving from Tabernacle, which is a long way off from a lot of parts of the state. Joey, what do we figure? It takes almost an hour to get from Tabernacle to Toms River.
Yeah, and then like 2 hours to get to a lot of North Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, this is no staff, no consultants, and he won this primary. And
there may be some back roads through the Pines, by the way, between Toms River and Barnacle. But there may be some dirt roads that he knows about.
Yeah.
Across that part of the state.
Tabernacle.
Yeah.
It's but the what the conventional wisdom is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in 15 of the 21 counties, Justin Murphy was first or second on the ballot, and he was running against 3 other Republicans who were just as unknown and mostly as underfinanced as he was, and that enabled him to just accumulate a lot of these, whether he was coming in first or coming in second. Joey, I don't know if you have that in front of you. How many counties did Justin Murphy finish, third or fourth? And by the way,
only one.
And I don't want to talk about the the total counties because there's a big difference between Ocean and Salem, but and I think it was Salem that their candidate, Richard Tabor, got 50%. In the old days with a line, Hirsch Singh won Ocean County by a whole lot more than that. Justin Murphy's a much better candidate than Hirsch Singh, so he could win a condo association election if he wanted to. But the other thing I'm getting from people, and look, this is here's nothing, guard it with your life, but I'm also getting from people of, if it wasn't the guy that we wanted, this guy's fine. He's good, there's no level of sophistication in his campaign. One of the things that I picked up on in the masterfully moderated Senate debate by Zach Blackburn is if you don't know who Justin Murphy is, and I'll say it very quickly: raised by a single mother, enlisted in the Navy at age 17, served on a Navy destroyer overseas, put himself through college and law school, served his community as the deputy mayor of a very small town, and wrote a book on the perils of judicial activism, and was the only candidate, with the highest level of recommendation by New Jersey Right to Life. But
is he a helicopter pilot?
He's not. He was not. He was, but he was named. And look, the reality is what I just said there. What his story is. I think it sounds like the good kind of bio story that's been working. All of that I learned from what he said at the debate, but he didn't package it that way. He never actually told his story. It was all bits and pieces. On one question, it was I was raised by a single mom. Justin Murphy, is and he's run before. He's run for Congress. He's run for U.S. Senate. This is just his time. But I think this was, you guys tell me if you disagree. This is a situation where if you don't know any of the names at all, because none of them spent a lot of money, ballot position, very important.
I want to add on to that and say the slogan is also very important. I know you said it's not as dominant as it was under the county line. I've not been here long enough to have experienced the county line. And this is the map that I've seen more than any other map in my time, my 2 years here in New Jersey, that shows maybe what the line might have looked like in years past. Because, last week I mentioned that in a race with no money and little name ID, would voters instead defer to ballot order and or slogans to make their decision? And we haven't seen slogans have a huge effect, but I think they did have a huge effect here. Matt Friedman ran the numbers for me. 19 county parties gave out a slogan. The winner of the slogan won 13 of the 19. And then the winner of the slogan came either first or second in 18 of the 19. Now, all 5 counties that Richard Tabor won were counties in which he had the slogan. I think there's a clear correlation between both having the slogan and ballot position, because there's just very little else that people were looking for and had the chance to look for.
Yeah,
but the important caveat, the essential caveat, though, is one that you just mentioned, which is that only has the profound impact that it does when voters don't know anything else about the candidates.
Right.
Well, and you also have to imagine that if Republicans had, I think that they are okay with Justin Murphy, but I also think this race was fundamentally a kind of recruiting failure. They didn't actually get any of the people that they were thinking might sort of be able to not make Booker sweat for re-election per se, but sort of, make it into a genuine actual election rather than sort of Booker versus generic Republican, which I think is most likely what this is going to become, just because I kind of doubt that Justin Murphy is going to be able to turn his fundraising around enough and do all the kind of campaign things he would need to do to make it anything more than that. And so you have to imagine that if Republicans had gotten one of the, some county commissioner somewhere, someone like that, to step up for this race, and then most of the county organizations had just fallen in line behind that person because they felt like the strongest option available, then you have to think that person probably could have, given how powerful the slogan seemed to have been in many cases here, not all cases, but in many cases, you have to imagine that a relatively unified state party could have pretty easily chosen who the nominee would be. The fact that it was then splintered among the 3 made the race that much more unpredictable, and it made it so that Murphy had kind of the conditions he needed to come out on top, and it also made ballot order that much more important.
But you also don't see the blowouts here. It used to be, in the days of Micah, Rasmussen, and I, if you had the line in Ocean County, you were coming out with 75, 80%, and Tabor got 50. If you had the line in Monmouth, it were those kind of numbers. Sedan was 60. It was pretty good. I think that was actually, arguably one of the best, best performances of an organization without a line. But there's somewhere where it just didn't work. Alex Sedan had the slogan in Passaic County, and Justin Murphy won it by 16 points. And that would not have happened. These kind of things would not have happened in the old days. And, and again, in smaller counties, Cape May, where the organization is strong, Sedan was able to beat Murphy by 24 points, and Cumberland, where Mike Testa was working really hard for Alex Sedan, he won it by 23 points. But those are outliers. You just don't see that anymore. And this is just an outlier, right? This is you don't typically see statewide race in a primary where none of the four have any name ID, none of them have any money, none of them have any big outside groups going on. I mean, Lakewood was sort of split. Tabor won Lakewood, and Tabor had the organization support. But again, you're talking about a race there that was sort of a four-way race. I mean, this is it's an impressive win for Justin Murphy, but I think he got lucky, and I want to. There's a bunch of other things that I want to cover, but this could be a good time to talk about this, which is the lawsuit against the line in 24. Judge Qureshi decided to end the practice of preferential ballot placement for a candidate by having the line, and said nobody should have that advantage. And what happened now is Judge Qureshi unwittingly, has now empowered a new system where the ballot draw potentially creates an unfair advantage. Now, the difference is the ballot draw could go, it's everybody's got an equal chance of getting the draw. It's not the county chairman's line, so it's maybe a little bit better, but again, it's not perfect. In the old days of Nicholas V. Caputo, the Essex County clerk, the man with the golden arm, that I challenged the integrity of that line. My case against him went all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court for them to say, something's funny's going on, but we don't know how he did it. And the reality is, county clerks in 2026 aren't fixing the ballot draws. We don't see a lot of stories about frozen capsules and indentations and a sticky substance that will stick to your hand after you've twirled around
or static electricity, right?
Yeah. I mean, but the interesting thing is, in the last 2 days, I have heard a renewed interest in going back to the drawing board and changing that so that there's more of a rotation, more of a randomness, that one person in a county doesn't have the best ballot position everywhere, that they would alternate it by voting districts in every town and try and even that up. And one of the things that I've been hearing in the last since yesterday is, county chairmen don't have a problem with the fairness of the ballot when the clerk picks their line for their candidate for the first spot. But they've now found that there are potential problems. We'll talk about the leakage later, but potential problems if they don't get that top spot. And it may be a risk that they're not willing to take.
Yeah, and that policy of randomizing ballot order, even within a county or within a town, was something that came up before legislators during those long assembly panels about the ballot redesign process. And it was something that some of the most strident, biggest reformers brought up, but that was never really entertained seriously by legislators. And I'm sure partly because it would be difficult to implement potentially, and so that's always an obstacle. But it's something to look out for.
By the way, Zach, not that difficult.
No.
Because
not that difficult, but if it adds another step, some people get a bit.
Part of the objection from people like Brian Stack is, We want to tell somebody the fixed position where to find our candidates.
Right.
We want to say, look for 7A or whatever, right? And there are some legislators who feel very strongly about that. There are others, and as you say, David, there are more people interested in randomization today, realizing the significance that it can hold than there were before this election.
Yeah.
I think we're learning a lot about the post-line environment in real life, real world situations. And the point, I think, for incumbents everywhere is you don't want to ever be in that situation where, what people know about you is driven by chance, is driven by ballot order. You cannot be a crappy candidate anymore. You need to make sure that people know more about you than just what order you are on the ballot.
Right. And that's,
I think.
Go ahead, Zach.
I think for all of these reasons, this is my second favorite map in my time that I've been here. Behind the map that showed the closer you were to Bill Spadia's radio station, the more likely you were to vote for him. I think those are the two weirdest ones that I've. It's been interesting.
Yeah, but and it's it's about name recognition and identified, and the lack of name recognition changes things, even when it involves some entrenched people. I mean, the two commonalities in places where organizations lost county commissioner races, in Essex and in Mercer, the winner, the one that the organization didn't necessarily want the most, Essex and Mercer, Deborah Engel and Nikia
White Bar, yeah.
They were in the first ballot position, and I'll maintain this, and the good thing about what I'm about to say is you can't prove me wrong because we have no idea, and I may be wrong, but I think that if they allow bracketing of candidates, and the bracketing, then the order is determined by how the bracketing letter is presented to the county clerk. And if it were John Cimino and then Lucy Walter instead of Lucy Walter and John Cimino, I think there's a decent chance that we'd be looking at Lucy Walter having lost her seat. So Cimino effectively, and it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, Cimino effectively gave up his chance for a better ballot position by agreeing to bracket with his running mate, because he was third, and he could, if he didn't bracket, he could have been first or he could have been second, but he was either going to be second or third. The bracketing letter ended his ability to be first. Right. It was
also worth noting that the one person who won the Cumberland County Democratic nomination for county commissioner without party support, two of the party-backed candidates won, and then a third, Lorraine Smith, also won, and she was also, I think, listed first on the ballot. Yeah. And she has a long history in that county. She might have had higher name recognition than most of those other people, but just another piece of evidence of she was the nominee in one of these races, right?
Yeah,
Micah?
yeah. But Francisini and these are long and
Pepitone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Zach, did you learn who Pepitone is?
I didn't. I looked a little bit.
He was the first baseman for the New York Yankees.
It's not a different guy.
No, it's a different guy, a different Joe Pepitone.
Yeah.
But that's why
Not a different guy. No, it is a different guy. Yeah.
Well, that's why I was confused. I thought that this Joe Pepitone had some crazy thing about him. I was like, all I can see is he shares a name with some baseball player.
Right. But no, if you go back and you check the videotape, what I said to you is that there's a Joe Pepitone that's really well known in North Jersey, but for different reasons than the Vineland Joe Pepitone.
I don't want to tell tales out of school, but there was a county candidate that I won't name who was bracketed with their running mate, and the difference between the two of them was 4.5 points, and the difference between their opponents who were bracketed was 6.5 points. So there is clearly something here.
So this is meant to get in the heads of members of the state assembly, and I
who all have running mates, right?
Yeah, and I think it's fair is is be careful of your running mate because he or she could be your opponent, and be careful of your willingness to bracket with your running mate because if you're number 2 on the ticket and you have a couple opponents, you could potentially get really screwed over by the bracketing letter.
There's a corollary to that, David.
Yeah.
Never agree to number 2. If
Right.
your county organization comes up with you as number 2, say, I don't want to bracket.
Yeah. And we could look at this next year after on ballot draw day. If you don't have a huge advantage, if you're not a household name with your own independent relationship with voters, and you can take this campaign to ballot draw day, I have a feeling one of the things you're going to see is withdrawals when people don't get a good ballot spot. They're just going to say, yeah, I mean, it's just, either that or they're going to separate from their running mate and treat the running mate like an opponent. But if they're going to do that, the time to do it is before ballot draw day.
And remember, this is all in the context of New Jersey as a news desert. It is hard to obtain information about campaigns and candidates, and even in the best of circumstances. Justin Murphy, great life story, not even on his website, right? You can't even find it on his website, can't find his bio. So it's hard to find information about some of these guys. And so, when all else fails,
I was going to say this. I was going to say this later. I'll say it now and maybe again later because Joey thinks I repeat everything twice anyway. Is that in the post-line era, I think what you're seeing is the age of the shitty organization candidate is over, and it used to be, you could be a really, really shitty candidate, but if you got the line, the organization can carry you through and you can serve in some of these public offices. I think that day is over. I think organizations are going to look for good candidates. And I think they're going to look for people with stories that could be relatable, people, products that they can sell. They're not putting Coke Zero up without a line. And
they're looking for helicopter pilots.
Yeah.
Which then also sort of changes the calculus a little bit interestingly, where, you might have some anti-organization or like non-party supported candidates win. And then that kind of changes the makeup of it. Let's say we're talking about the state legislature here. That changes the makeup of Trenton, and that adds sort of a slightly more rogue caucus, and it adds people who aren't necessarily accountable to anybody but themselves and to voters. But also, if the organizations, in order to counter that, are choosing sort of less loyal machine cogs and more independently smart, accomplished politicians or, people in the private sector or military veterans or whatever, that caucus of people is also going to be different from some of what we've seen in Trenton over the decades, right? Because even though they are still the party candidate, that's the type of person who, if they're presented with some bill like the Oprah overhaul, like maybe the person who gets the organizational support, but has some, real professional background and smarts on stuff, is still going to say, no, thanks. Like, I'm not going to vote for that. You put me in here because I'm going to think for myself, and I'm thinking for myself, and I don't like that. Yeah. So you could get sort of a much more open and unpredictable state government and county government or whatever through both pincers on that.
Yeah. And I look at, I'm reticent to pick an example, but it wouldn't be like me if I didn't, just say what the hell, I'll offend somebody. So look at the 12th legislative district, Rob Clifton, been there for a very long time, safe district for the entirety of his career in the legislature, not necessarily a household name. What if a guy like Rob Clifton suddenly, draws a really good primary opponent? And what if Rob Clifton falls, he's not first on the ballot now, he's third on the ballot. And he's not accustomed to campaigning. He hasn't, he was a Monmouth County freeholder before that, which means the race of his life were special election, and conventions where he had to win county committee votes. He's never really had to compete for in real contested primaries, and certainly not general elections. And he's not a he's got a day job, and he's not out there in the community 7 days a week. So what if he's got a real tough race, and he's got Middlesex, and he's got Monmouth, and he's got part of Ocean, and he's got part of Burlington. That's that really tall, skinny district that was created out of nowhere in 2011. That's the kind of thing where what if his opponent has Justin Murphy kind of luck, right? And what if his opponent is draws first or second in all four counties, and then he's bracketed, and Alex Sawicki, his running mate, much more active legislator, much more aggressive on sponsoring bills and selling his ideas. That's exactly the kind of person who could be in trouble. And conversely, there are people on the Democratic side that are like that too, that are just, they're not well known. They haven't needed to be. All they needed was enough, strength with the county chair and key municipal chairs in their district, and some endorsements, and they could cobble together a very long career in the legislature. But with a diminished local media, it is harder than it's ever been to become known to your constituents, and I think that's going to be a problem.
Partisanship can carry you in the general election, right? Just having the right D or R next to your name can carry you in a town, Jackson or Upper Freehold, right? But when that goes away in a primary, funny things can happen. And we saw this in Georgia this year. There were plenty of Democrats who turned out in that primary election. But when Republicans were smart enough to take partisanship off of the ballot for those Supreme Court seats, Democrats did not end up voting for Republicans in some cases because they didn't know who was what.
So I think that's one of the things that people are going to be looking at. Micah, I agree with you. Warnings. Two bits of warnings for every legislator. And by the way, this also goes to county commissioner candidates and to borough council and township council and township committee candidates. And if you're gonna bracket, you better be first. And just remember that man or woman that you sit next to in the legislature, that you're always photographed with, that the bumper stickers have the two names, and the lawn signs have the two names, and the mail has the two names, and the digital has the two names, and that person is very, very easily your opponent.
Because David, you get two bites at the apple. If you get the right bracketing position, take it. And if you get the wrong bracketing position, you get a second chance to get the top spot in the draw. So you should always take that second chance if you need it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're unopposed, life gets a little better for you. But if you're going to have a primary opponent, we're seeing, I could add to this, paid for by citizens for randomized ballots, because suddenly legislators are going to look at the, holy crap, what happens if there's two or three people in the race against me, and I get I get a bad ballot position. I don't want to chance that. So suddenly randomization of ballots is looking a little better to people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, Joey. There are a couple other congressional districts, a couple primaries, but before we go to those, I want to ask you about Frank Pallone in the 6th district. 66% for a guy that it's not like he did nothing in this campaign. He did. He was spending a little money, because Frank Pallone he is always nervous about every race that he runs in. He's not a guy who takes things for granted and does zero. The bottom line is he's been in Congress since 1988, and slightly more than a third of the primary voters didn't vote for Democratic primary voters didn't vote for Frank Pallone. So what's going on?
So I think that you've seen this type of challenge a decent bit in New Jersey. I feel like it increased starting in 2018 and has been kind of a low running thing since then, where you get just one or sometimes two, in this case it was two challengers against Pallone, making the ballot as kind of like a left-wing protest. And they clearly want to be like the next AOC, and they don't really have the political acumen or connections to pull that off. And so you end up with a result that's usually in the realm of like, so Pallone actually faced one of his opponents from this year in 2024 as well, and he won 84% to 16%. And that feels kind of like the median result in that case, where someone pulls the very, very hardcore kind of left-wing voters and maybe some other people who are disgruntled with their incumbent. But it doesn't really go any farther than that. Yeah. And I don't necessarily have the cleanest explanation for why suddenly, the same guy who lost 84 to 16 last time is now behind 66 to 26. And then there's another candidate, Katie Bansal, who's got 8%. My biggest guess is that it's age related, age and sort of long-term incumbency related, where the Joe Biden debacle just kind of opened the floodgates for Democrats to be suspicious of any name that they've been seeing on their ballot for decades and anybody who frankly looks old. And Frank Pallone is in his mid-70s, and he's very sharp and still sort of in command of his stuff on Capitol Hill, but he moves slowly. He's an older guy. That's just that's part of who he is, like how anybody ages. And I think that might just be a penalty that older incumbents, especially in Democratic primaries, face for the next little while. The memories of Biden are too fresh. I think there's also some ideological elements to this. Pallone is pretty progressive, but he is on the more pro-Israel side, and John Su, his main primary opponent, ran pretty hard on that. That was part of his whole pitch, was Palestine. And that's clearly worth a fair amount of the vote in a Democratic primary these days. That's a pretty disjointed explanation, because I don't think that there's a super jointed answer to this, but that's, I think, kind of the universe of stuff that's happening here.
This is a very online part of it, but I was surprised in the run up to the campaign, to the election, how much this district was on national progressive radar screens. And it doesn't mean that they thought that they were going to win it by any means, but it was constantly mentioned by progressive influencers of, oh, we're keeping an eye on this one, we're watching this one. It was on their radar screen. And so I think we would find, as Joey said, younger, more progressive, more, less tied to Israel, right? That generational divide as well. There was some defection there. There was some interest in moving on. There was some interest in challenging. And I think it will probably continue to be on that radar screen in future years.
Yeah, and the results are actually quite similar to the 8th district. Just mathematically, Rob Menendez beat Musab Ali by, I forget where the margin exactly landed. Let me get it up. 69 to 31. So quite similar there. And I think that there's some other dynamics that are similar there too, where it's a progressive incumbent who is not like genuinely of the left, and is maybe sort of friendlier with some corporate interests, friendlier with Israel, and gets a challenger who is truly of sort of the left, and loses that kind of third of the vote to them. The difference, I think, in narrative between the two races is that nobody expected John Su to come anywhere close, whereas Musab Ali against Rob Menendez was like a real candidate with a real electoral history, really pulling in real supporters. And there was talk, at least at first, of this being like, oh, is Rob Menendez going to have to really fight for this? And so then the fact that he's still won 70-30 is kind of like okay, Rob Menendez is kind of locked in this district, and he's kind of okay.
But isn't one of the differences between Rob Menendez and Frank Pallone is that poor Rob still has a little bit of an unfortunate last name? Menendez
has the misfortune of having a bad last name and the fortune of being in his I don't want to insult him here. Is he in his late 30s or his early 40s?
Right.
One of those.
Yeah. The sneaker wearing, and
he's exactly 40. Okay. So I wasn't going crazy with that.
Yeah. But he's, look, he has, in his 2 terms in Congress, has done some things that have at least allowed him to put his own record together, and you have to give him that. And I mean, the guy was all over the Delaney Hall thing, and that's that was the right place for him to be. But there's still some people that look at the name, and he's going to take him a little while to overcome that. I think what ought to concern Pallone is jump ahead now 2 years, and we could all maybe develop the clairvoyant skills of Judge Kelly Conlon and read people's minds. But think about 2028, and think if it's not John Shu, who people don't know him, and he's got $50,000, and what you could be looking at is, what if it's a Democratic House? Frank Pallone is chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. He may not be advancing some of the more progressive environmental proposals that they'd be looking at coming out of a Democratic-controlled House. And what if the opponent in the 2028 primary isn't John Sue with $50,000, but it's an Army veteran combat surgeon, or a
helicopter pilot,
or a woman who could fly a helicopter, who's got a great resume and a great story, and all of a sudden is able to go to some of these progressive funders and say, look at me, I can pull this off. And I mean, and Pallone, if he's chairman of Energy and Commerce, the amount of money he could raise is just, unlimited from super PACs and hard money donors. And I think he's got $3 million cash on hand now, and he's not going to have to spend that against Hillary Herzog in this district. But there's a point where maybe the super PAC money could backfire in a district like this, and and he doesn't have the advantage of the line. I think Frank Pallone's, and the guy works hard. He works hard. He's on all the time. He is perpetually nervous about his local politics. He is the municipal chair of Long Branch and a member of Congress. He is, he is laser focused on local politics and political issues. The fight.
His brother's the mayor.
Brother's the mayor of Long Branch. The fight for the hospital. He was Phil Murphy's best friend in the congressional delegation, and that didn't last the full 8 years because of the fights in the hospital. Pallone is positioned to maybe have a tough primary if you get a really, really good candidate there. Anyway, I spent too much time on that, but I wanted to point that out. And at least we've gotten through 6 and 8. So Joey, why don't you go to the 9th district Republican primary?
Yeah, so that was, if Republicans are going to flip any seat in New Jersey this year, it's going to be the 9th. This is Nellie Poe's district. It shockingly voted for Donald Trump in 2024, but then super duper reverted back to Democrats in 2025. So we're at a little bit of a loss as to what the partisan baseline of this district is. And I think that the bigger question mark is what's it going to look like in the 2028 presidential race. But people are feeling maybe increasingly confident that it's going to boomerang at least somewhat back to Democrats this year. So that's obviously not to the benefit of Republicans. It's going to be an uphill climb. It was going to be an uphill climb for whoever Republicans nominated, but they ended up having a really competitive nomination fight. There was Tiffany Burris, who's the wife of Plaxico Burris, and Rosie Pino, Councilman Clifton. It ended up becoming sort of a brawl between the county party organizations, where the Passaic Republicans endorsed Burris, and the Bergen Republicans, despite their chairman initially endorsing Burris as well, voted to endorse Pino at their convention. And that was just sort of, neither candidate raised enough money for the campaign to sort of exist on those terms. And it mostly became like, okay, how far can organizational strength and even just, the slogan get you? And the degree to which it really is just sort of like too evenly matched. And by the way, last time I checked, sorry, I'm trying to get it up now. Yeah, the AP still has not called this race. We have called it, and Pinot has declared victory. And we don't really think that there's the number.
And the Burris people have basically declared defeat.
Yeah, there's not really the numbers.
What the AP is waiting for here, but this.
I think the AP has gotten confused about how many votes there are left to count. I think that's part of it. Which I would maybe lay a little bit of the blame on them and more of the blame on the Passaic County clerk for never giving a clear sense of whose votes are where and what's happening. Right now,
it's not her fault. She's got some parameters placed on her that aren't her fault. But that's
even though the law says there needs to be a daily report when there's votes outstanding.
Yeah. And by the way, so what, right? They're gonna prosecute the county clerk for not, what are they?
That would be interesting.
Yeah,
that would be an interesting court case.
But they're not doing it. They might sue Donald Trump for not having the pulse reports out properly. But they're not doing that. Right. And
that was a throwaway line, the point of which being that
the Passaic County is the California of vote counting.
Yeah.
Although it's a lot better. Listen, we can bitch and moan about New Jersey's vote counting, and that would have been reasonable to do in like 2020 or 2021.
It's gotten really good. And by the way,
know what's happening in all these races.
Tahisha Way and gets a whole lot of credit.
Yeah.
For really revamping the way some of these things are done. And it is to the benefit of Democrats and Republicans alike. And nobody's, there's the amount of transparency today versus 6 years ago is just incredibly good. And Jersey should be sort of proud at the improvements being made, but it's not perfect. It's not there. Please, county clerk, stop doing PDFs. Please, no more of these PDFs. Burlington for much of the evening was a disaster because there was a breakdown and they weren't able to load it. And finally, they went from being a PDF county to being a clarity county to being a last minute. Well, let's just put a PDF up. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to have Joanne Schwartz on a live stream holding up numbers, or going, doing whatever it is signals. They've got to get their act together. They've got to test their systems. But go back to District 9.
Yeah.
Real numbers here is that Pinot had the line in Bergen County and she got 61%, and Burris had the line in Passaic County and she got 62%. Bergen's a little bigger. They have more Republicans there. Pinot came out of Bergen with 4270, so far 4271, and Burris came out of Passaic with a little under 3100. Hudson had, I said the line, I mean the slogan. I'm still, muscle memory on saying the line. Hudson County, Pinot had the organization endorsement. Here's nothing, guard it with your life, everybody.
Burris had it in Hudson.
Burris had it, and Pinot, still won. She won 55-45. But by the way, that 10 points is 69 votes. in Kearney, part of Kearney. So it's not that significant. So so the organization held a little bit, and look, Tiffany Burris struggled to raise money.
Yeah.
And everybody thought, I shouldn't say everybody because Joey, I don't think thought this. But I thought, Plaxico Burris has got to have some wealthy friends. He's gonna, he's gonna, send out a bunch of text messages to his, people that he played with in the NFL, and to people that $5,600 is a meaningless, insignificant rounding error of their, of their net worth, and surely he could get 25 ex-NFL players to max out to his wife, and I didn't see any. I didn't see any.
Yeah, and her campaign was just interesting in general because it came in with the chair endorsements, and then one of those fell apart because Bergen Republicans endorsed Pino instead. And there was this sort of idea that she was like, after Pino hadn't impressed the national GOP and after Billy Prempa had gotten in and then gotten back out and sort of burned everything down, that she was going to be the one who came in and sort of saved the Republicans in the district and returned them to sort of have a normal, dependable nominee. But the campaign itself just never fully came together. Pino is sort of a bit more of a maverick, and some of her more maverick-y qualities ended up in attack mailers against her. But I think it wasn't quite enough to sort of move the needle. And I think that she goes into the general election as someone who is less well-known in DC anyways, who had more of a sort of on-the-ground grassroots campaign apparatus, and will just sort of more generally be a more unpredictable nominee against Nellie Poe, which is maybe, if you're a Republican, what you want, right? If you're looking at a district where the partisan math looks rough for you, where Nellie Poe has a huge financial advantage, and where you are sort of looking up at this Cheryl plus 20 district and thinking like, good God, can we even compete here? Maybe you don't want a Republican who is, for the most part, just sort of down the line loyal Republican. Maybe you're looking for someone who can have a higher risk and higher reward ceiling, and I think that might be Pino.
Yeah, I think she's willing to take risks. I think she's feisty.
Yeah,
I think she's willing to get really aggressive in this race in a way that Burris wasn't in the primary. And Burris had a great team, so I think this is pretty much was a deficiency of a candidate who looked better on paper, maybe a story that was more interesting than it really is. And
I think the same could be said of the Republicans' chances, though. I mean, Joey, I remember you and I having a conversation after the presidential in 2024, and we both came to the conclusion that you just talked about, which is that, on paper, 26 should be a really good shot for Republicans because Donald Trump won the district, and they should be going after any Democratic district where Trump won, right? So on paper, this should be a top target. But when you start looking at it and you say, okay, well, a lot of these were presidential voters who were not going to come out in a midterm. And a lot of the fortunes of Republicans in the Hispanic community have changed in 2 years and are not what they were in 2024. So when you started looking at it and going deeper than just what's on paper, it didn't quite translate into the opportunity that it might have when people were very high on Trump winning Passaic County in 2024.
Right. I mean, I think coming out of the 2024 election in general, I think this is true whenever a party sort of wins I'll call it, the Trump administration likes to call their election win a landslide. It really was not, but I'll call it a convincing win. It was every swing state win. It was swinging a whole bunch of communities that never had voted Republican before to Republicans. It was a demoralizing win for Democrats. And that kind of put Republicans in this sort of euphoric state and Democrats in this funk of like, man, is Nellie Poe going to lose in 2026? And man, can we ever beat Tom Kean Jr. if he just won by 5.5 points? And you always have to kind of remember that like these 2-year cycles of House and Senate races are short in some ways and incredibly long in others. A lot changes. Republicans were in the ultra dumps after the 2008 presidential election. And then 2 years later, they came back and won a gajillion seats. And the mood was completely flipped around. And so now we're in the mood swing era. We're back in the era where Democrats get to feel optimistic about defeating Kean and where Republicans have to feel pessimistic about defeating Poe, just because that is usually how these presidential midterms work. It always kind of swings back.
Yeah. You're right. I don't want to go too much longer. So I want to wrap it up. I think we talked about, Mejia's 82%, McIver's 85%.
Mejia, if she had, I think we said this in the pre-primary live stream, where she was never going to lose, but if she got a sort of underwhelming percentage of the vote, then people were going to start looking at 2028 and thinking, man, this congresswoman got 66% of the vote when absolute nobody's running against her. What happens when somebody runs against her? But if she's getting 83% of the vote against 3 opponents and winning everywhere, then that, there's no emerging moderate majority in this district that's just absolutely jonesing to kick her out.
She won Livingston. which Hathaway held her to 2 points in general, but she carried Livingston in the primary in a super high turnout year where there was a big township council primary there. So I think she's in good shape. The best election night press release was from Larry Poster, who was McIver's opponent. He sent out a press release that basically said, if pigs fly and I win, here's how the press can contact me. And he gave his cell phone number out, and it was but McIver, right now with Delaney Hall, what's her upcoming trial at some point, she's at the top of her game right now, and 85% in a contested primary, really nobody ever gets 100%, and these were impressive wins. To wrap it up, I want to we're not going to go exhaustively, and we talked about Essex and Cumberland and Mercer commissioners, but one of the points I wanted to make in this post-line era is that we didn't see any organizations stumble and fall, but we saw little bits of leakage here and there. An organization-backed candidate didn't win the Rutherford primary. Lost one in Bloomfield. There was a loss of a council seat in Perth Amboy, one in Piscataway. A really close call in New Brunswick. The organization-backed candidate for mayor in Lawnside, lost. A progressive candidate in Merchantville flipped one of the council seats. Better, I think this is what we're beginning to see is what Micah talked about, candidate quality. My declaration that the era of shitty candidates is over, because county and municipal chairs don't want to carry somebody that can't win, that doesn't have a good story, that doesn't work hard.
They can't carry them. They may want to, but they can't.
Right.
They're ripe for the picking.
But financially, a shitty candidate bleeds the party of financial resources, spending money in a race that they never had to spend money on, which takes away their resources for a general election to try and actually beat somebody of the other party. There were stories up and down the state of old time incumbents who just said, I don't have to do this, I don't have to go to that. I've won 3 or 4 times on my own. Everybody loves me. Everybody knows me. I get a great reception. When I go to the Knights of Columbus, golf outing, and you sort of look at all of this and you realize that the people who don't work hard. This is a message to state legislators next year. If you haven't been in a race in a while and you're not raising money already, and you're just sort of lying around the couch talking on the phone, you have a certain vulnerability that you don't expect to have, and if you're not going to go door knocking, and you're going to be on vacation and in part of the winter months, there's and then you get a crappy ballot draw. There's going to be a lot more attention to ballot draw day than there used to be. We're just going to be at a point where the candidate quality is what's going to stop the leakage. And we saw, you said, some of these little incidents. They lost one. Essex law, the organization did okay in Bloomfield. They lost 1. There was some talk that they might lose 3. That was a race where you had Mikey Show and Cory Booker on one side, and you had Andy Kim and Ana Lilia Mejia on the other side, and and you had Assemblyman Mike Venezia, the Bloomfield Democratic Municipal Chair, the former mayor. He nearly lost his own seat last year. Here's a guy who suddenly got really engaged and said, show me how the van works. Show me how, show me how you target people on digital, learning the new ways to campaign, because without it, you're gonna have more and more, losing candidates. I look at Piscataway, and I look at New Brunswick and some of the numbers, and I'm thinking, I don't want to be Joe Danielson, who almost lost the primary last time. The brand may just not be working, and you're going to have to see if he has done the work in terms of raising money, or is he going to go and say, hey, Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairman in Somerset County, looks like I'm going to have a tough race, and I've got very little money in the bank, and Mr. Speaker, I need you to save me, and I think that's that's where we're going to go. When you've got a leaky tire, there are 2 things you can do. You can either repair the tire and plug the leak, or you can buy a new tire. But what never, ever, ever works is to ignore the fact that your tire is leaking, because one of these days you're going to walk out there and that tire is going to be flat and you can't get anywhere. And I think that's sort of what we're going to be looking for.
I think, not to pick on Joe Danielson, but I think he got the message with that race, and of course he was one of the chief sponsors of the Oprah law that was so reviled by the progressive community, and I think since then the answer back from the speaker is probably go save yourself, and he has been more out front on democratic issues, progressive issues in the 2 years since then, and I think he's hoping that it will be a different story for him come this primary, that he has gotten the message and that he's working hard and that he's sponsoring bills that progressives should like, and he's hoping to stave off that same kind of challenge. I don't know if it'll work or not, but that seems to be.
I got to tell you,
he was the one sitting legislator to endorse Ana Lilia Mejia. I loved her graphics. They were like Bernie and AOC and Joe Danielson.
Yeah, I mean, look, the progressives that I speak to, that Oprah bill was devastating for him, and he's not, if he really wants the progressives, doesn't he need to say, introduce a bill repealing his old bill, and say, I apologize, I got this wrong, I didn't do well by you, and I'm gonna, he hasn't done that. I think he's incredibly vulnerable, and I was about to go look and see how much he's raised, in the year since his last primary, but you all know that I think there's a huge difference between an FEC report and an ELEC report. It doesn't matter what they raise, because they, you can't tell what they have. They have the joint accounts and leadership and parties and all that. So,
and I think it's late enough that we don't need to start looking through 2027 ELEC reports.
Yeah. But look, the reality for a guy, I'll just stick with Danielson, because it's sort of what we were seeing this year, and where we're going. Here's a guy who he runs with Kevin Egan, who's part of IBEW and the Mercer County Building Trades, and Kevin Egan at least comes to the table with an ability for hundreds of thousands of dollars to find his way if he's in trouble. So does Mike? I'll ask you this question, and then I'll let everybody else talk. But does Joe Danielson want to be on a bracketing letter with Kevin Egan if Loretta Rivers, who almost beat him, the vice president of Piscataway?
Oh my gosh!
Again?
Wow, that's a wild one.
Yeah. Of course, his best chance may be Kevin Egan pulls him over. I don't know. So let's start to close up and talk about local races and what this means, not just for this year but for next year. So Joey, you want to go first? You don't?
I feel pretty confident that we have said everything that we need to say for tonight.
Okay, that sounds good. Zach, anything new?
You covered it pretty well, deeper than I could.
Yeah.
I would say Passaic, the Passaic organization passed their test. They beat the Bernie-endorsed insurgent commissioner candidate. That was something I told people to keep an eye out for, and it didn't end up being close. So that's the way it goes. You got to give props to John Curry, who announced his candidacy for re-election this morning, and DeNova and Furlong and and their team. Curry has beat back two very difficult primaries: the sheriff in 24, and the county commissioner race this year. The only real law, the only real electoral loss non-county committee for him was Kenyatta Stewart, but he deserves props for that. He really does. So listen, this will be, this has been a great 10 hours and 26 minutes. Joey and Zach have a nice night. Mike and I are going to spend the next 3 hours going municipal race by municipal race. We're going to analyze county committee, in different towns.
The only thing I would offer in conclusion is just that the organizations, not only have they had the rug pulled out from under them, and progressives would say good thing, right? That the rules have been changed, but they really were not built for primary races. They were built for general election races, and they are learning, and damage is being done while they're learning. Some of them got it, some of them didn't, and they've got to get up to speed, and they've got to get up to speed quickly.
Yeah. Okay, that's it. We're the hard stop is in 4 minutes, and we finished under time for the first time ever. So Micah Rasmussen, Joey Fox, Zach Blackburn, thank you for a great primary, and thank you to all the political junkies who watch this. Have a great night, and we'll be back at some point again someday. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
One day.